Yeah, fine. We'll reconvene the hearing, and we've got submitters. Are you Mr. Ron Ashby?
Yep, Ronald Ashby.
Good. Thanks for coming, Ron. We've got a response to your submission from the property group, but we think we just want you to go over your submission again and clarify it to us, and might be better. So the floor's all yours. Thank you.
So I'll put a few points in there now, just for the bigger picture. The residence on Stratford Street there, it's the Hyde Park sort of area which is proposed for rezoning, and so it's a 110-year-old property which our family has had for around 75 years, so that's been our neck of the woods for quite some time. So I'm the spokesperson for the interested parties there. Now it has been run by my family as a boarding house in the past, and prior to that the same nature, so as an established dwelling. So my concerns are not particularly that it's going to be rezoned to a light industrial, but it's more so in recent years you've got an aspect of people who are confrontational if it's not a industrial estate style setup. So I'm talking about things that start up in the hours between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m, which if you look at the guidelines, that's a lower generated noise time, and that's one of my underlying reasons for being here, because you take away the green belt and the park areas, and it does distinctly change the character of the area. So my questions are going to be, will there be industrial rates once this goes through, because it's flip-flopping at the moment? My understanding is it's mixed use, so if it goes to a light industrial, is that industrial rates? I do have a question here from the first draft to the second draft, and it relates to LIZ 04, so that's just a change. So maybe if we had somebody who could give me an answer to that. And yeah, the only other real point that I want to clarify is from my paperwork that I've had printed off for some time. It's got a anytime decibel level, and it looks like it's gone from 55 to 65.
So there's two issues there, if I get it right. One relates to rates, what will apply, and the second one is in terms of the overnight noise levels, what will apply going forward.
Oh, not necessarily. Well, I think that noise level there is any time of day, but yep. But it is, and I can give examples if required where it's really quite like it's sort of kind of really full on some of the activities over that period, and then there's conflicts over those couple of certain activities, and so I just want to put my voice forwards on that, because it's like notable for a workmate who's over the other side of Ardwick Street, so he's a kilometre or whatever away, and he is in the past. Like, that's not an issue at the moment. Like, now that's sorted, but that's just an example where you've got somebody who's quite a distance away, and he hears these activities start up. And for our property, which is a stone's throw away from some of these, you get several people who they're just like, nah, well, it's an industrial setting. You don't have any say. Hence.
That second one that you've just referred to, get the planner responsible for the report to comment on that. The first one in relation to rates, the amount charged on rates is a fairly complex issue that primarily is impacted on by the activity taking place on the site rather than the zoning.
Right, that's okay. That's simply why I've asked that question.
However,
Where the zoning changes and the land value changes can result in a small change
Yep.
to the rates charged where the rate is charged on land value. That wouldn't click in until the next revaluation is done for properties. So what's the zoning of the property at present?
Well, we'll see. So for a large part, it would have been some sort of industrial, but at the moment, from what I can tell, it's mixed use.
Right.
So yeah, that's something I want to clarify, because you go from mixed use and then you go and put the rubber stamp down on light industrial, and then my perspective was it could have, once it became industrial, it may have had gone into a new rate layer. But
Yeah. So as I said, that's the main factor is the use of the land itself.
yeah.
Now, with regard to noise, I'll turn to the planners to talk about the potential of a change in noise levels on an existing residential activity in the same zone.
Yes, so we'll be covering noise in a future hearing, and we'll be having a noise expert coming along to that hearing. But just on a general basis, noise is dealt with on a zone-wide basis, so the rules are set up in the manner that within a zone there is a higher tolerance for noise received within that zone. So if you take the light industrial zone as an example, you're correct, it's 65 dB at any time within the zone. If you were in an adjoining residential zone, the noise that can be received in that zone is lower. So activities in the light industrial zone need to be mindful and reduce their noise as it's received in an adjoining zone. But unfortunately, it isn't on a site-by-site basis, so it doesn't take account, unfortunately, of activities which might not be industrial in that zone. Because it's a zone-wide provision, it would be quite complicated to write a rule that, required consideration of a one-off activity such as residential in that manner. But I do fully understand what you're saying. It's how we can craft the plan. The purpose of the light industrial zone is to provide for light industrial activities, and so the noise levels reflect those activities which are, anticipated and enabled in that zone.
Yeah, so it would be nice to think that there was some kind of so Resource Management Act 1991, what we've got here is excessive noise, anything that unreasonably interferes with the peace, comfort and convenience of any person. So I'm assuming that what you're saying negates that.
No, not at all. So Section 16 of the RMA applies regardless of what the rules say. So Section 16 is an obligation to avoid unreasonable noise, and that is, it's almost a sort of provision that sits outside of the district plan. So regardless of what the district plan says, the council's monitoring and enforcement officers still have powers under Section 16 of the RMA if the noise is deemed unreasonable. So I guess you might look at what's in the plan as a sort of a baseline level, but if there is still and it is quite a discretionary, and this is something the noise expert will be able to talk to more in the noise hearing. Yep. My understanding is, Section 16 isn't about there being a particular sort of level. It is about, well, is that noise tipping over to unreasonable? And it may be that even if you have the district plan noise standards, but something's running, 24/7, even at that level, it could be under Section 16 that is actually deemed unreasonable. So it's almost like a separate provision to the plan standards, which council's monitoring officers would be responsible for looking at. But yeah, if you're able to, I don't know if you're party to the noise hearing, we will have a noise expert.
Yeah, no, there'll be something so that's one.
Yeah.
That gives me information, and I can have clarification on things.
Yep, so the noise expert will be much better placed than myself to answer questions around the interface between the district plan and Section 16.
Just a question for you. Is the noise threshold for light industrial higher than it is for mixed purpose zone?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Because all the information I've seen, it sits in here. and it is commercial, industrial, mixed use. So from what I've read, not in great depth, but it seems to put that level into a combined commercial, industrial, mixed use. I've got this, and that's
Yes, so that's the operative plan that you currently have. In the new plan, we have split it out. And what we've done is, based on the advice from our noise expert, is we've looked at the characteristics and the types of activities anticipated in those zones, and then what would be a reasonable level of noise to allow those activities to operate at a reasonable level.
Yep.
So yeah, the mixed-use zone under the proposed district plan is a different characteristic to the mixed-use zone in the operative plan, so that there is some differences there.
Yep. It's just that this one here, so I'm pretty sure this is the latest one. And if you go through, I don't see mixed use in there. However, there is commercial zones and light industrial zone, and so it sort of combines together.
Yes. So if you look at,
and it also says that, it says within the boundary town, so you've got centre zone, local centre zone, neighbourhood centre and mixed use zone. So mixed use seems to be, just from what I'm reading here, it seems to be sort of tied into light industrial. So that's what I'm going off.
So it may be helpful if someone who's got access to all the necessary things can bring up 6 Stratford Street and what is it zoning?
so it's under the current plan, it's zoned mixed use, and under the proposed district plan, it's zoned light industrial.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So there is a difference there.
I think the description that you gave over the relationship between rules and nuisance would be a useful one to do a little note to the author of the noise report to include something like that, because I think that's particularly helpful.
Yeah, no, I'm the author of the noise report, so I'll
Yeah,
make a
okay.
note for that.
So I guess for Mr Ashby, the point that he wants clarified as part of that hearing,
Yes.
he needs to be satisfied that, number one, the noise levels permitted in his area are going up, but in terms of the property that's occupied, they need to be satisfied that it's not going to be a nuisance to them.
Yes, as I said, we'll have a noise expert there, and he will be far better placed than I am to answer those questions, because that's his expertise is noise. So yeah, that is something that I will certainly convey to him, that we will address through the reports that come out to understand that. Yeah.
So from that point of view, what you've raised is very useful. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, so we've been there a long time, and we haven't.
Yes.
I'm probably the first person who's ever been in here over the recent times, because we understand, you know, people do this, people do that, and there's noise generated, and a lot of time it's intermittent. But yeah, just in the last little while, you've got sort of people who would probably be more suited to an industrial estate, and that's where the concerns come from, because then you're going to because one instance where it has become quite confrontational is that he sees it as a classic industrial property, and that we have that as a tenant and a ratepayer, that we have no so that like a heavy industrial outweighs our any say that we've got.
Just a question. So have you, in the mixed zone use, have you had any noise concerns with that zone?
So as it sits at the moment, yeah. Well, there was one main one, and it was I don't know whether I need to get into naming the exact activity, but it's a early morning activity, which I would say in any part of the town would be a little bit contentious. So that was one which had started up in a building which was a storage style building. So what you end up with is people in tin barns or big tin sheds, and which were not, they're not designed for like full-on things going on inside them. So, but that has gone from well, probably was a temporary situation to a sensible thing, which is certainly it's not a contentious thing with me now. So, but then you still have another example, which yeah, is quite happy to, and this is quoting somebody else in the area. He says going to town is how those activities right through the from 10 p.m. till 7 a.m. So, yeah, for me to question that, yeah. So you've got somebody who feels quite happy to go to town during those lower noise levels, and yeah, it's getting a little bit difficult.
Staff help me out, and we're in the section 42A report. The submission from Mr. Ashby's dealt with.
It is dealt with in the commercial and mixed use section 42A on page 54 at paragraph 216.
So when I look at the way you've summarised it, it says that the zoning is opposed, which in some ways may not reflect the words that are there, but if the zoning's opposed, light industrial, I guess it could be inferred that he would prefer to have the mixed-use zone applying to that area.
Yes, it wasn't specified in the submission what zoning Mr. Ashby would prefer.
So what are your views on providing a mixed-use zone for that area?
It certainly was considered, and in the Section 32 report, we did look at mixed-use zone as an option for that, but we did quite a comprehensive audit of the activities that were in the area, and that's outlined in the Section 32 report, and it was the predominant use of that area is in light industrial. And so light industrial, I think there was a total of 3 residential dwellings in the area, and so the purpose of the mixed use is a much more kind of, you know, a wider range of activities. And so given in this area there was a high concentration of light industrial activities, it was determined that that was a more appropriate zone than the mixed use and would provide for those activities more comprehensively than a mixed use zone.
You could still have rezoned light industrial but retain the same noise levels for the mixed use zone, can't you?
You could, yeah. It's a question of understanding whether that would curtail some of those activities. But yeah, that is one option you could look at. Certainly, when we get to the noise chapter, that is something that you could consider. Or there are other ways of framing up the noise provisions. So yeah, that's definitely something you could look at.
Just a question for Mrs. Crazy Wolf. Can we make sure that Mr. Ashby is notified when the noise zone submission and discussion as it occurs, so that you can be informed? And it's been very helpful what you've brought to us today. Give us something to work through.
Yeah, and as well as that, you seem to have, if you know where Scott Sheet Metal used to be, so you were talking over the bridge, that's sort of a, I think that's light industrial at the moment. So mixed use over the bridge, light industrial, and it seems to be that there's been a bit of a swap with those two zonings. Not that there's really between mixed use and light industrial was really whether there's too much of an argument between the two, because I don't think the levels actually change between the mixed use and industrial. But when you put in that the soccer fields are going to become a mixed use, it makes that situation look like a buffer zone. So you're going from a green, you know, you're centre of town, this is where the property is, centre of town, you've got a green belt around it, you've got a public park. But if you take that public park away, you take the soccer fields away, and you turn that into a mixed use, it's got a look to it as if it's going to be a buffer zone for to be, you know, it's yeah, if you take a park away and you turn it into something maybe similar to a park, you've got a residential element to whatever. But if you take that park away and you turn it into a mixed use, which is actually for the residents along there, it's probably a concern for them. So yeah, just playing the whole bigger picture into it, and that's why I'm making an appearance.
As part of the preliminary work on the plan, were there any noise readings done to look at issues? Or any follow-up in terms of any noise, where noise complaints are coming from?
I would have to go back and have a look at the noise section 32A, but I believe we did look to see how many complaints there had been, but I couldn't say that for certain without going back to look at that information.
It is an issue for later, so I'm just flagging it at this stage. Yep, I'm satisfied. Have you anything more there?
Yeah, so the only other thing that we haven't covered was between the first proposal and the second proposal, there was the LIZ 04, which had changed in there. So I was just interested in as to what the reason for adding something, a new paragraph as such, into the plan. If somebody had an answer for that.
Probably not as part of this hearing.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and track through. Sorry, industrial wasn't a focus of mine for this hearing, so I haven't quite worked my way through, but we'll be getting to that. So, yeah, we can definitely.
And that's simply something I've looked through from the first one to the second one. I've seen something in there a bit different. So.
Yes, we'll make sure that is followed up on and get back to you on that one.
Rightio. Well, thanks for your time, people.
Thank you.
It's good.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm here. I'm hoping that's a good thing.
Right, all good. Thanks for your time. See ya.
Sorry, are you waiting for me now? Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
Yes, by all means, you can have the floor now and proceed.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much. Listen, I just want to double check that you can hear me okay and that my internet connection is working well.
Yep, yes we can.
Great. Okay, no, that's excellent. Okay, so my name is Jonathan Barner-Thompson. I'm Heavy Haulage Association Chief Executive. I've been in the role, I can see you all now too, that's fantastic. Yep. So I've been in the role for quite a number of years, and as an association we've been making submissions to district plans around the country since 1998, although I believe that this is the first time we've submitted to your council's plan. So we're primarily a transport-related association, but we do this work on behalf of our house moving members to submit on the controls for relocated buildings, usually moving into a council area. So don't believe we've got any operators that are based in your council area, but we do have a number that work within your area or work around it. So some of them might include Scabies Transport, King House Removals, Transit Homes, and McNeely Heavy Haulage. So they frequently, between them, transport quite a number of relocatable houses, be they recycled or new transportable homes. So our main interest with making this submission is on residential buildings that are relocated into or within an area. However, this hearing has come up before the residential and the rural zones, which is primarily where residential houses are relocated into, but there is some interest, and so our submission identifies a little of this, and so some of it is around where you've got residential permitted within a mixed use zone, and also in some of the special purpose zones we would understand that relocated buildings can be an option, so whether that's in the airport zones or some of the open space zones or sports clubs, some of those operations may well use relocated buildings. So that's where our interest is. Our primary aim with all of this is really to treat a relocated building with the same controls as a built in situ, given that really the amenity of a relocated house in particular, once it's been reinstated to site or in the with a new built-in situ one, once it's actually been finished construction, that really the ongoing amenity is pretty much the same or similar. So that's where our main interest is. Want to highlight some points that we've made in our submission, but just to reinforce those points really. So in regard to the 42A report, so in general we agree with the permitted activity focus for relocated buildings. However, we disagree with the approach that's taken in the plan to actually control this. We believe that for easier interpretation, that really the rules for relocates shouldn't be in a temporary activity section. Really they should be specified in relation to each zone. This is primarily because we don't agree that the temporary nature of the reinstatement is actually the best way to understand the work that needs to be done in order for a building to be reinstated onto the site. And I guess I'd just reinforce our point 3.4, which highlights the definition of a temporary activity in the PDP, which stated to mean activities in their ancillary buildings or structures that are intended to have a limited duration and are not part of a permanent activity that occurs on the site. Clearly, I would argue that the property owner intends that the building that they're relocating to a site is intended to be there and intended to be a permanent activity on that site. So I don't believe that that is the correct way to actually, if you like, control or manage relocated buildings. Also, in our experience, it would aid property owners when they're looking at the plan to actually say, listen, what's the controls on a relocated building coming onto our site? If they're looking in the zone rules, they're not going to see something that says temporary activities, and perhaps they might not understand it as a temporary activity either. So therefore, we would see it as an aid to compliance that actually the rules for a relocation were actually inserted into each zone. And this has been the practice that most of the other councils have used in their district plans that we've submitted to over the last 2 decades. So I guess we respectfully request that each zone has the rules specified for the relocation buildings in each particular zone. And I guess really the final point really I'd just like to make in my submission here is that the performance requirements are actually included in the plan. So the Section 42A report sort of said that they didn't need to be. We would once again argue that it's actually important that the timeline for a relocated building is actually established in the plan and in a part of the plan that's easily accessible. For us, it's really important for the property owner to know up front what the timeline is, so it has to be on for exactly on new foundations within a period of time and completely reinstated within the 12 months. So that's what we believe is a useful way for the plan to convey the information that's required for a property owner if they're relocating a building onto their site. So a lot of what I'm saying relates to a residential building, but equally I would argue it would apply to a building that is in a commercial zone that's permitted by the commercial zone to actually do that, or the other zones covered by this hearing. So that's a summary of the points I'd like to make, and happy to enter into any questions or discussion.
I guess my initial thought is I'm wondering why relocatable buildings are treated differently to new buildings. And if we look at the temporary 8 or R8 rule, it says that temporary buildings are provided for in all zones. Number 4, working backwards, number 4 says that work is completed within 12 months. And I guess for the planners, my question is, does the same rule apply to new buildings? If not, why not?
I think this comes down to the reason why the relocatable buildings rule is in the temporary activities chapter is because the actual relocation and reinstatement on site is, in my view, the temporary activity. Once the house is obviously established on foundations and complete, it's a permanent activity on the site. So where I guess what you're asking is, should we have a temporary activity rule to say you have to build your house in 12 months? Is that what you're...
Well, why the difference?
There can be an amenity issue if you have a relocated building that's taken to a site and left on the site unfinished. So that temporary activity, the temporary building rule is to combat that, so you don't have relocated buildings left on sites.
And there are a number of houses around this district and elsewhere that are new houses that haven't been completed and are just sitting there with the same effects as a relocatable building.
I think once the houses are this might be outside of my area of expertise, but I suspect that if you've got a building consent to build a new house, and then you have to work through your building consent with inspections and things, that keeps things moving. And you do need to get to a point where you've got CCC. This is probably something that I will have to check with you. Whereas the relocatable buildings, you have different reports that you have to get and then go through that building consent process. So there might be a difference there. But I mean, as I haven't seen rules for requiring a new building to be completed in 12 months. So.
Okay, so let's go to rule number 2, that talks about a pre-inspection report coming in with the building consent. Under the Building Act, does the building consent require a pre-inspection report or a copy of the building consent from the previous location?
As far as I'm aware, it needs a pre-inspection report.
So we are duplicating by putting in the district plan that particular provision.
Potentially.
And if you don't comply with it, not only are the builders going to be jumping up and down, but so too is the planning department saying you need an additional consent. So purely from an efficiency point of view, it would appear we don't need that rule.
Well, it would be checked on a PIM check. I think our submitter would like to say something.
Oh, sorry.
I'm happy to chip in.
Yes.
I don't want to overrule the conversation that's going on, but I'm happy to contribute to it. Yeah, that's all.
Well, if you can tell us from your experience, when a building consent goes in for a relocatable building, is it required to have a pre-inspection report as part of it?
No, is the short answer. So the building consent is actually only for the new building work, and typically, if you're talking about a house that doesn't require any additional work, the building consent is only for the new foundations.
So I guess the next question I have for the planners is, how do we have a rule in a district plan that requires something to be done under a different act if that other act does not provide for it?
Sorry, can you rephrase that, please? How are we requiring something under a different act?
Yeah, so if the Building Act does not require a pre-inspection report to be part of a building consent, how do you enforce a rule in a district plan relating to a consenting process under a different act?
Well, I guess the way the rule reads is like a standard. So if you come in on a planning check with the building consent, you'd be reviewing the documents and you'd be asking for that building pre-inspection report. We wouldn't be requiring it under the Building Act, we'd be requiring it under the RMA because it's in our district plan.
Okay, so what is the RMA purpose of having it? Presumably it would come in and go to the building inspectors. Is this just a procedural thing that you're putting in there that has no benefit but has cost?
Potentially. I mean, it seemed to me as if the submitters were also wanting a pre-inspection building report. So I'm not sure if this is an area of contention.
Well, from the discussion that we had before, I'm trying to work out why do we treat relocated buildings differently to new buildings, and what is the environmental effect that we're trying to manage? If it's just a process thing, why is the district plan getting involved in it is what I'm trying to understand.
Can I just chip in here? So you could have buildings to be relocated of any sort of standard, I guess. So you might have an older house that might be in a poor state of repair. So the pre-inspection report covers whether that building is going to be suitable to be relocated. You know, when it gets to site, is it going to stand up? It's not going to fall down and cause an eyesore, which would have amenity issues. So, you know, your point about building a new building, yes, that's one aspect. But having a building which is relocated, if it's not of a certain standard before it's relocated, you know, and then it gets damaged during relocation, you may end up with a building on a site which has a pretty poor level of amenity, and the district plan is trying to provide for a good level of amenity in areas. And so the purpose of that is just to, you know, ensure that that building is suitable for relocation, and that when it gets to site, it's going to, you know, withstand being put on piles, and it's not going to cause an eyesore. That's my interpretation of that.
Okay, which is fair enough, but where in number 2 does it say that the building and pre-inspection report shall satisfy the council, which isn't necessarily the right words, that in fact the building coming in is suitable? There is no standard in that rule that actually requires to be met. So you could do a pre-inspection report that says this building is absolute rubbish and will fall down, and there is nothing there that enables the council to say sorry, and under the planning provisions we're not going to let you do it because you've complied with the condition.
Well, it's the so the second part of the sentence is the report identifies reinstatement works that are needed, and then the third sentence is that the owner certifies they'll do that reinstatement work within 12 months. So you've got an identification of what the reinstatement works are. So the roof, you know, if you cut the house in 2, reinstatement works would include potentially re-roofing. And so then there's a certification that, yeah, that's going to be carried out within 12 months. So you're not going to have a building that's cut in 2 without a roof sitting on site for more than 12 months.
Okay. I can't take it any further. I can understand number 3, that it's on permanent foundations within 2 months, and I can see the reason for it. In terms of the matters of discretion, so if there is non-compliance with 1 to 4, and I couldn't work out how you would end up with a non-compliance prior to bringing it on the site. So the non-compliance would, in terms of number 2, would only apply after 12 months. In terms of number 3, would only apply after 2 months. At that point, you would need a consent.
Well, if somebody didn't have a pre-inspection report, then number 2 would be triggered. I think it's probably just worth noting that we haven't actually had any submissions on Temp R8, and so the scope of changing that rule is, yeah, there isn't really any scope to change that rule. God, that's my understanding. I mean, you could seek some legal advice on that.
Okay, I'll leave. Just seemed weird to me, though. So the changes that are being sought by the submitter then, he's supportive of having the rule. A key point that he's put forward today is that it's not in the temporary activity part, it's dealt with in the zone rules. Can we overcome that, I guess, for the planners in terms of having a note somewhere on the rules in the zones saying refer also to?
Yeah, so we have a general note in each of the zones that directs people to look at the plan as a whole, because obviously it's not just the temporary activity chapter, there's the noise chapter, well, the whole district-wide chapters apply across the district, so people have to generally look at the other district-wide matters to see whether they are compliant. You know, if you're building a new house, you would need to look at the transport section to check your, you know, if your access is compliant, and you would need to look at the noise chapter to see whether you need to meet any obligations there. So, you know, people need to read the plan as a whole, and there's a note in each chapter that makes that clear.
So, in paragraph 117, it does say that one of the standards, which is number 1, where it says that the relocated building complies with zone standards for buildings in the relevant zone. There might be an opportunity to, because it relates to the building itself, you know, I'm just thinking out loud whether there may be an opportunity there to also make reference to the temporary rule. I hear what you're saying.
Do you mean reference in the zone chapter?
Well, yeah, it's almost the other way round, isn't it? Yeah. No, as I said, I was thinking out loud there.
Yeah,
that's fine.
that's okay.
Thank you.
I mean, I do understand the issue that, you know, people wouldn't necessarily know to look in that chapter, but you could sort of extrapolate that to a lot of other chapters as well. So I think it's just that comes back to reading the plan as a whole.
I guess too, it comes down to the brochures that the council prepares, and where there have been issues in the past, councils have prepared brochures for particular types of activities. And if the council was of a mind, and the council's done one on fencing, for example, if the council was of a mind to do some sort of brochure, or the submitters themselves were doing some sort of link for their members, that's where you would usefully say, these are the provisions that you need to go and check.
I just want to clarify a point with the gentleman from Heavy Haulage. One of your concerns is that the building you're being asked to move is up to a sufficient build standard, and that's covered off by council building pre-inspection. Would that be correct? That's why you support that?
Yes, although the building pre-inspection report's not necessarily carried out by the council. And I guess the other point that I was making, and listen, you've maybe identified a difference between what we seek and what the plan seeks in terms of the pre-inspection report. We don't say that in our wording that the building has to be up to a particular standard. We just said an inspection report shall accompany it, right? So
Okay.
it accompanies the building consent, but it's not actually required for the building consent. But I guess also whether or not it's up to the council standard or not is not something that we seek. What we seek is what is the work that was required to reinstate on the exterior of the building, the work to reinstate it into the site.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess in terms of what I was trying to work through just before then, the inside of the building may not be suitable for the proposed use, but provided that the external appearance looks okay, then that's the outcome you're trying to achieve.
Correct. Yeah, so the inside, so our standard pre-inspection report does, I guess you could say it's a minimum standard, at least it's safe and sanitary, right? So that's what our pre-inspection report does request the person undertaking that report to certify.
All right, so I've misunderstood the intent then of the pre-inspection report, and I'm wondering if we need to include a definition of what a pre-inspection report is.
Yeah, so in our submission we included our template that we've submitted to numerous councils around the country and has been accepted. So some councils choose to adopt their own report, other ones use our report as a template.
So for the planners, would you see some merit in including a definition of what the report includes?
Yes, there's quite a lot in the report, so if we could summarise it down to a clear definition, then that would be an option if we've got scope to include that. Yeah.
And I think the explanation just given then and by doing that would meet the issues that I was trying to work through. So as I said, I clearly misunderstood what was intended there.
Perhaps could I also add the gentleman's question or the point that you were making before about why there are different rules for relocate compared to a new building. I guess the thing that I would add to the conversation is that while our preference is that there is performance standards, so a timeline, I do need to point out that lots of councils have not adopted that. They say that as long as a relocated building complies with, with site coverage and setback and other things that a new building does, I guess, have to comply with, that there are no specific controls for relocated buildings, particularly in residential and rural areas. So I'm thinking of places like Rotorua and Kawerau, for example, are places that do not require or don't have specific standards for relocating buildings, as well as Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Dunedin, interestingly enough.
It would appear, though, that you haven't opposed the provisions relating to them, you just want it added to them.
No, we haven't opposed it. I think in our submission, our summary of evidence in 4.1H, although my page isn't quite printed out, I think we would say, if you like, our fallback position is that if the council wished to simply add relocated buildings wherever it says new, that we wouldn't be opposed to that either.
So we don't get totally confused on this side of the room. What's the planner's view on that alternative then, of not having the rule, of just having it listed and treated the same as?
So we have provided the wording that was sought by the submission to include the word relocated for buildings. So as Mr. Barnard-Thomas Thompson, said, the relocated building might have an ongoing use, and so it should be treated as any other building. So the addition of the word relocated into all the activity rules that we've recommended through our reports ensures that that is the case. In terms of the temp R9 rule, as I mentioned before, I don't think there's any, you need to get some legal advice on whether there's scope to do anything with that rule, because we haven't had any submissions on it. We'd need to just consider a bit more about whether we recommended that that was removed or not, if that was an option.
So just exploring it for a moment, maybe that, we need some advice in terms of whether the corollary to doing the new or relocated buildings in paragraph 111 is that it gives an ability to take out the temporary activity rule.
We can certainly ask for some legal advice on that.
Yeah. So, Jonathan, did you follow that I'm seeking advice whether, in fact, the temporary activity rule can come out the way that that alternate option that you presented would treat relocated and new buildings exactly the same?
Yes, sorry, the audio wasn't that great, but yeah, that's what I understand. And as I said before, we have accepted that in a number of other council areas around New Zealand, that approach, yeah.
Okay. Any questions, Glenys? I think we might have wobbled our way through that one. Thank you for your input.
No problem. Thank you for letting us appear by teams. That's been very useful. Thank you very much. Yeah.
And our next submitter would be Environment Southland. Are you there? Are you online, the Environment Southland person? Not yet. Hello, can you hear us?
Oh, yes, I can.
Good.
Not very well. Volume isn't great at your end.
Try and do my best. Is that better?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Perfect. Hey, I'm not really going to need the full 45 minutes. I'll keep it reasonably brief, and I'm sure you're already running a little bit behind time anyway. So, is it all right to kick off now?
Yes, you can, thank you.
Perfect. So, well, good to see you all again. My name's Marcus Roy. I'm Policy and Government Manager at Environment Southland and submitted in relation to the proposed core district plan. Key themes for the sections being heard today relate to natural hazards, so effectively prevention of natural hazard risk is better than cure. So we're looking at, with the zone chapters, trying to make sure that they are set up to ensure that they provide the right development signals in an enduring way beyond the life of this district plan. So we don't want enabling decisions to then trip up council and Environment Southland down the track. So we just want that to be a conscious thought in the back of the minds of the panel as they're going through the natural hazard provisions. Effectively, stop banks they have a design life or a design criteria for specific flows. and over time modelling and improvements in climate data are signalling that some of the areas defended by stop banks still have residual risk, and there are some examples where floods overtop stop banks such as Edgecombe in the North Island, and effectively there's some significant changes already occurring with insurances, which was talked about in hearing one with the panel. Some of those areas behind stop banks are finding it difficult to get insurance. So I guess that's the general thrust of the Environment Southland position, but in relation to the specific zone chapters, we have sought some minimum floor levels as part of the submission. And I think our submission is around paragraphs 97 of the 42A report. So the planners outlined, I guess, the position of the Environment Southland submission and the recommendations around that. And I mean, we largely aren't too concerned with some of the recommendations. We see that there's a bit of a balancing act around where some of the natural hazard provisions sit, whether they're in the natural hazard chapter or whether they sit within the zone chapters. I guess my preference from a planning perspective is that generally in the zone chapters it's a bit more of a go-to chapter and a bit more easier for plan users that are lay people to go and look at a specific chapter of the plan to get an understanding of what the intent is, what's the permitted activity criteria, what am I getting myself in for purchasing a property, and having, I guess, the floor level requirements and some of the indicators even in the overview part of the plan, having those signals are quite good signals to send around what the level of risk is, because ultimately the large parts of Gore and Mataura are in the floodplain, and that floodplain existed long before Gore was established in the position it is. And it's a natural way the topography sits. Sure, there's a stop bank and there's some buildings and bits and pieces that help keep the river where it should, but largely the floodplain is going to exist long after Gore's another 200, 300 years. That floodplain is still going to exist. So we just want to, I guess, make sure that there is the right signals in the plan documents and the provisions around making sure that the indication of flood risk is still well known in Gore, rather than just being we'll leave the natural hazard stuff for the natural hazard chapter. The zone stuff is purely about enabling growth and making sure that there is a really good connection between those two parts is effectively what we're after. So yeah, generally that's pretty much the thrust of where we're sitting today, but we're certainly going to be looking to be pretty closely into the detail of the natural hazard chapter when it comes up for review. I think it's hearing 9 potentially. So yeah, looking to have a pretty good conversation around the natural hazard provisions as well. But I guess we're seeking to try and get a bit more context in the zone chapters as well. So happy to answer any questions the panel may have of the submission points or any points of clarification.
If I understand you correctly, you've just signalled that these points will come up again through the submission phase, and you're probably assisting the panel just to keep on track and bear in mind these issues you wish to raise as we go through the various sections, rather than wait till the end and have to backtrack a wee bit.
Yeah, that's effectively what I'm seeking. You don't want to, I guess, lose the traction on making sure that the zone, the natural hazard provisions, in my view, are better off woven through the chapter rather than that segregation between the chapter of natural hazards and the chapter of town centre or mixed use zones. If there no commentary around natural hazard and flood risk in those chapters, then there's a perception from a layperson picking up that chapter of the plan that it's not much of a problem. So just want to make sure that there's that visibility and the attention isn't lost on making sure natural hazards are done and considered through that planning process.
Yes, we understand your point. Thank you.
So as part of the submissions that you've lodged, and there's about 15 submission points for the town centre zone, one of which says include a performance standard regarding minimum floor levels. Now the town centre zone and other parts of Gore are subject to protection, if that may not be the right word, from the flood banks that we've got. Are you suggesting there should be a minimum floor level applicable within the town centre zone?
Effectively, yes. I guess there are a few ways to identify or mitigate risk. So I guess we're in a position where the stop banks are going to get overtopped at some point. They've got to design parameters that they're only going to be successful for. So if you get a 1 in 200 flood, for example, or possibly more, at some point those areas are going to be overtopped, and there will be significant flood potentially going through the centre of Gore. I guess there's a number of different things to weigh up, and I'm sure the panel's aware of some of the risks and opportunities around that. And I guess the position we're in, we want to try and see mitigation best we can. Not entirely sold on minimum floor levels, but it is one of the ways in which you could mitigate risk, I think.
So if we were to accept
a long-term solution of migrating the town centre out of its current location is one of those options, but that's a long burn process. That's going to take several years to get any significant traction. But it's one of the options. I'm not saying it is the option. I'm just saying that effectively promoting its town centre zone, carry on and continue building multi-million-dollar buildings. There could be a risk in the future where some of those buildings may not have insurance, or may be difficult to get insurance for residual flood risks, or you may be penciling council and Environment Southland into a position where they need to continue upgrading stop bank defences to protect a level of investment that could be better located elsewhere.
If we were of a mind to accept your submission with regard to the town centre zone, what is the minimum floor area level that you would like us to adopt?
The minimum floor level would be the one that's in the natural hazard chapter. So there's a table there in paragraph, I think it's about 104 of the planners report. It talks about a 0.5% AEP, which is equivalent, I think, is the 1 in 200 year return period.
And how would we work out what that is? Does the flood banks presently cope with such an event? How would we go through working out what the amount of water is that we'd have in the town centre zone?
Yes, so effectively Environment Southland is going through a flood modelling process at the moment, trying to understand exactly what the current defences look like and what different scenarios are going to flow down through that catchment at different periods. So that's part of the work that is in train but not yet finalised. So we're looking to try and bring that to the panel at some point in the future and work out exactly what that flow regime looks like, what the risks are, and help build a picture around exactly what that means in terms of practical sense, whether that's 200 mils or is that 300 mils or is it 3 metres. So that's effectively, I guess, the piece of work that is in train and has been commissioned for 18 months now, but is still not yet finalised. But it is on its way and will be presented as part of the hearing process moving forward.
So I guess for the planners, the recommendation on those various submission points is to reject, as it will be considered at hearing stream 9. Having listened to you then and the feedback, I think the recommendation intended is to defer until we have hearing stream 9. Is that,
correct?
I'm having some nodding.
The submission and opportunity to present today is just I guess making sure that we're still not closing any doors on the opportunity of imposing different regimes and different zone chapters as we take our way through. So a bit of a holding pattern in terms of the position in the different zone chapters.
So I anticipate from that then, and look forward to it, that when you come to the hearings on hearing stream 9, not only will you discuss different options for hazard mitigation, but also the implications of those different options for how they're dealt with in the district plan.
Certainly, that's our intention.
Thank you, Marcus. I've got no questions. Any questions, Glenys?
No, fine, thank you.
No, we thank you for your time and your
Thank you.
Thank you for your time and submission. Thank you.
So just real quick, panel, we've had an addition to our agenda today. This is Peter Kempthorne. He wanted to present, and this is his submission. I printed it really quickly. I don't know if you, because Ruth is also waiting. I don't know if you want to speak with her first. Then we can talk to Mr. Kempthorne and how you wanted to try to do this.
Did you say the jet boat person's waiting?
No, Ruth, you had more questions for her.
If we can hear from Ruth, because it's going to be very quick.
Please proceed, Ruth.
No, we're going to ask her questions.
Ah, I'm sorry. We'll proceed.
Yeah, thanks Ruth, and thanks the opportunity of coming back and having read through your report. Just a couple of quick things picking up on. How does, and maybe interaction between you and the other planners, how does the use of the upper floor of buildings impact on the rules for the 100 square metres, or you're now recommending that it be above that?
Could you just repeat that question for me?
Okay, so
How
it's
does the other
yeah,
building
so
within the buildings?
yeah, so we've got a rule that talks about a maximum of 100 square metres for the activity, and the recommendation from today is to increase that potentially to 250, or take it out altogether, and the recommendation at the end. How does the use of the upper part of buildings on the first floor impact on the rule for the floor area?
Sorry, maybe I can just jump in there. So the standard is worded that it applies to the ground floor, not the upper floor. So it's only that shop on the bottom. It's not the second
Right,
story.
so a shop can have an upstairs as well of another 150, 200 square metres,
I suppose it could, yes.
which is what, we've got a couple of shops in town that do have 2 stories. Okay, so the rule isn't intended to pick up on those.
No, it's in relation to those shop fronts, really down and kind of creating that vibrancy.
Okay. So that,
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Thank you. And we will ask Mr. Kempthorne if you want to.
Afternoon, Peter Kempthorne. I'm the advisory committee spokesman for the Gore Airfield. The submission really to thank the Gore District Council for actually putting the airport into the district plan. It had been missed out. There was nothing in the district plan for the airport apart from the height aprons at the end of the runways. So thank you for that. The other thing is that we requested was a noise buffer zone around the airport to protect the airport for the future. And just wondering, the council have done it for their water treatment plants at East Gore, but I'm just wondering why they can't do it for the airfield.
What are the noise activities that take place at the airport, and other than the landing and takeoff of aircraft, which tend to be in a limited area?
Yeah, it's only the limited area around the airport. If you go to airports, you'll see that there's quite often, for example, Manapori, they've got a no drones sign with a 2 kilometre zone. It's around most airports. As the noise, as the aircraft are coming into land and taking off, it is that particular area that we're looking at. Well, we'd like it protected for the airfield.
Would that be within certain hours? Because, like in the evening, nighttime hours, from 7 till, or from 10 till 7 in the morning, or something like that, you would?
You could have it between the daylight hours, but you have got to remember that the Gore Airfield has actually got runway lighting. It can be used all hours of the day and night.
Is it used at night for any purpose now?
Just for flight training. Yeah, there's no commercial activities from the airfield at all. It's either a ferry flight or flight training or the agricultural top dressers returning. But there's no commercial flights from the airfield.
Used for emergency as well, at night?
Yeah, well and truly, yep.
So I'm just trying to think through how if we drew a circle 4K out from the airport, what sort of distance that would be back, and what are you actually wanting to see controlled in that area?
It's the new people that move into the area that, for whatever reason, on the particular day they don't see an aircraft, the real estate don't notify them of an airport. There's aircraft patterns happen once the new people move into an area, and then they start questioning the borough, questioning the noise. Low-flying aircraft, because you've got to come in lower to land. It's just to put some protection around that airfield.
Has the council, would you know if the council's received any noise complaints from aircraft operations?
Unlikely.
So, I guess the question we've got to face is it worth putting a rule in the plan for something that's unlikely?
I think the prime case is the individual that moved from Auckland down to the top end of Mataura, and Transit had to extend their 70k zone approximately, I don't know, half a kilometre, because she complained about the too faster traffic on State Highway 1. That was in place for a number of years, and now it's been reinstated to where it used to be. But it's very easy for an individual to complain, and without something in place, or their notification that the airfield is close nearby, we've not got very much to stand on.
Is there any provision in the rural zone, because the airport's situated in the rural zone, to add some protection in there. As you could say in large part, some of those activities are rural activities, or certainly connected to agriculture. Is that another way of doing it?
So the airfield is within its own zone, but the area around it is in the rural zone. And I think what Mr. Kempthorne is asking is for that buffer zone to essentially lay over that rural zone to protect from a reverse sensitivity perspective. So in my report, while I technically rejected that submission statement, it wasn't to reject it, it's to kick the can down the road to the noise chapter. So it's not that we've made any decision that that's not an appropriate noise buffer to have, it's that it will be addressed during the noise chapter.
Okay, all good then, thank you.
Apart from that, great.
Yep, so it's going to come up again, and we'll ensure that you're put on the list of people to come back and talk to us at that stage.
Yeah, the noise expert's been briefed to look into it, so it's,
yeah. So I would anticipate then, if it's going to come up, some sort of guidance that if we did have a buffer area, I guess, while Peter's described really trying to bring it to the attention of people and avoid complaints from the provisions that are in the plan, it's really saying, similar to the state highway, if you're going to have rooms for bedrooms, etc., you must have a certain noise standard in them. In the case of a state highway, you've got traffic going through 24/7. In the case of an airfield, if there's very little activity over night time, it's a technical issue whether it would actually meet the threshold to justify it, but we can find out more for that. Yeah, it's on the radar now.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Could I just chip
Thanks for your
in?
input.
Yeah,
Peter.
please.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry, just one thing. We did actually look at, I know you provided some feedback on the draft plan, and through with the noise expert, we did actually consider a buffer, but we didn't really feel like we had enough information to understand whether, as Commissioner Havell said, whether it was warranted based on the level of activity. If there was an option for the airport to provide some further information about the scale of their activities, you know, I think you've answered some of the questions today. That would probably help us for preparing for the noise chapter hearing.
Yeah, I'm just, at the moment, there's a certain activity that's going on. You've only got to go to the neighbouring airfields, and they're getting busier and busier, and they're trying to play catch-up. Cromwell, those other towns, where suddenly the population is actually encroaching on the airport.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd just like it to be done before the
I
population
understand.
expands too quickly.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that can certainly be factored in, but just having some understanding, you know, the noise needs to, you know, if something's going to be considered, it's got to be appropriate for everybody and balanced out. So understanding what you're trying to mitigate, to have some sort of hard facts would be really useful if you're able to provide that.
The big thing is, as long as the people that are inside that zone appreciate that there's actually an airfield there. That's...
Yeah, can I raise something while we've got you here?
Sure.
And we had a conversation this morning about firefighting in the airport zone, what provision is made there. And the feedback given is that there's a couple of water tanks that are there. I suspect the fuel storage facilities are required to have firefighting as part of them. Are you aware of what businesses provide for themselves?
Briefly, if there's a fire down there, the fire engines will not get on the runway anyway. They will not be able to get off the hard road. Very rarely does a fire engine get off the tar seal. The council have put their dog pound in, and that has got a fire connection on it. But the trouble is that's behind a security fence. So the fire brigade can't actually get it because they can't get through the security fence. There is another tank there that Phoenix fill up. It's available for firefighting. There is no firefighting facilities for the 80,000 litres of fuel that are there. There is sump, when there's fuel spillage, all those tanks are in place, but there's no firefighting facility. It's a double-skinned tank. Basically, if it's gone on fire, there's a lot of other things that have gone wrong before that. It's been a purposely lit fire, not a... Yeah, yep. That's regards firefighting. Yep.
So it's all compliant?
Yep.
With them?
Yep. Anything else?
No. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
I think the next cab off the rank is Jet Boating New Zealand. Come forward, please, and let us have your submission.
Afternoon, I'm Nathan Barker, and this is Eddie McKenzie. We are here on behalf of Jet Boating New Zealand. So Jet Boating New Zealand, we advocate for recreational river access, maintain relationships with other river users, and in this sort of instance, RMA bits and pieces. I'm the chairman of the Southern Rivers Subcommittee, and Eddie McKenzie has held that position for a large number of years and a wealth of knowledge and experience in jet boating. So we are here today to talk about some of the wording in policies 1 and 5 around avoiding activities that can be managed. So I've just got a few presentation points here I'll run through. So JBNZ appreciates that recreational jet boating activities can be controlled by district plans and other RMA legislations. Hence it is interested in district plan reviews throughout the country. One of JBNZ's objectives is to promote recreational jet boating and protect the rights of jet boaters. Again, this leads on to taking an interest in district plans and participating in review processes. JBNZ considers that the RMA is an enabling type of legislation and provides opportunities to undertake activities. That said, it also requires control and management of activities to promote sustainable management of resources. JBNZ has a broad view that waterways can be a shared resource and recreational jet boating should be promoted and enabled, albeit with controls and management to reasonably mitigate potential adverse effects to the environment. District plans should be enabling and should recognise the concept of sharing of the waterway resource, albeit with an application of controls and management actions to mitigate potential adverse effects. The suggested amendments to the policies 1 and 5 are provided to better reflect that recreational activities within the natural open space zone should be enabled, albeit with suitable controls to achieve compatibility with the character and amenity of the site and surroundings. In addition, the policy should recognise that compatibility can likely be achieved with control and management of the activity details. Hence, an activity, if initially considered to be incompatible, may well become compatible through the application of appropriate controls and management actions. This analysis of compatibility and application of controls and management actions should be reflected in the policies. Happy to answer any questions around what we're asking.
Part of the Mataura River has an uplifting of the speed restriction. Does that still take place once or twice a year?
So it does. We're allowed access on the Mataura River for the month of September, correct? August, September. And other than that, we have to apply for temporary speed upliftings.
Okay, so that uplifting is for an area south of Mataura, is it? Not the whole river?
Not the whole river, no.
No, so, and as part of that then, I guess my question to the planners is when they've got an uplifting of the speed restriction, whether there's a provision in the plan that actually gives them an exemption from the noise rule over that week.
Yeah, well, we're dealing with the natural open space zone at the moment, the noise and the surface of water activities are going to come up later in different hearings. So we've submitted to those as well. So this was just more about the wording in the policy. Was it 5 or about avoiding activities, and we're just saying that like the RMA is an enabling type legislation, so there are other with having a void in the policy, it's hard to actually do anything after that. It becomes the norm, is just to avoid it rather than actually work around it somehow.
Is the adverse effects just limited to noise that we're talking about?
No. Well, adverse effects. Joe, or which one is Joe, but who rang me the other day, said that the natural open space really hinges around the Croydon Bush and Dollamore Park. We assumed that the natural open space, albeit we assumed wrong, was just all the rural area basically. So there was a bit of a mix-up there on our behalf, but we still believe that having the word avoid in there is it makes it difficult for any other person to do an activity, you know.
I think too, when we talk about adverse effects, it is quite a subjective statement. What somebody deems as something having an adverse effect on the environment or the amenity is up for discussion and debate, which is quite a bit deeper than this part of the plan. But yeah.
You know, what I'm thinking of is that jet boating is a particular activity that has an exemption for a short period of time. And I guess the question that will then therefore come up later is, should there be a provision in the plan that actually recognises a dispensation for the noise side of that week that you've got the dispensation on the river?
That has been written into the plan. I'm pretty sure that jet boating in the noise chapter, that is there is no level because it's such a short term. You know, a boat goes past and it's all gone, and they've recognised that in the plan. All we're saying is that once again we're getting off the track a bit, but in the temporary activities, that recognition is not quite there. So we've submitted to temporary activities on noise, and we've submitted to the surface of water activities, which are coming up in November. Not sure when the noise one is, but the surface of water is November.
Are there other constraints as well, like nesting time for birds as well? There's a time frame around that as well, isn't there, for jet boating?
There is, that's what Doc would tell you, but all our studies show that jet boats don't have any effect on nesting birds.
Once again, that adverse effects is a subjective discussion, which is like we do work quite closely with Doc and trying to understand what those important times of the year are. But I guess the problem is if it's written into the plan to avoid all activities that have adverse effects, then we've got nothing to sort of start with, I suppose. We can mitigate the adverse effects if we're allowed to, but if we have to avoid it, then we don't even get to do that. So, but yeah, there's ongoing discussions with Department of Conservation on around those sensitive times and understanding those, and that is part of JBN's role as we try and sort of work with other river users as well.
My experience on the Shotover River is that jet boats have no impact on fish, because you see the fish actually in the stream, the wake of the boats as they go past, so you know exactly where to cast your rod. I am wondering though whether have you submitted on the temporary activity provisions in the plan?
Yes.
Okay.
And the noise and the surface water.
Yes, that was the other one, surface to water, yes, okay. That's cool. So
So
today's
we'll
a
be
bit of
back.
an introduction.
Yeah.
Yes. Cool.
Okay, that's given us something to think about. Not the least of other alternatives to the phrase avoid. So thank you for coming, thank you for input. We'll take that on board and see if there are some other options. It might be difficult, but anyway, as you've explained your situation and we've understood, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for talking. Thank you. And their final submitter is speaking on behalf of Kiwi Rail.
They have indicated that they cannot be here any earlier than 3:45. So
Until 4.
it's for Kiwi Rail.
Yep.
So because they have other commitments. So essentially you can just take a recess until they're available.
That's great. Thanks very much. We'll adjourn.